Welcome back to PodX. Our guest for today is Jayvardhan Goenka. Jay is the youngest director of Dynamix Group, one of India's largest real estate development companies based out of Mumbai. He started his career at a young age of 20 and quickly earned the respect of all the members of the organization by his efficient methods of working. Jay, along with his team, leads the activities at Dynamix Group. Jay, thank you so much for being a part. This is like super exciting for me.
Thank you very much for having me, Ayush. It's a pleasure, and hats off to you to actually reach out and to actually make it happen. So kudos to you.
Yeah, I think this one's like going to be interesting one for me personally because I think there's so much for me to learn. Like all the questions that I've had in my mind and prepared is like the questions which I really want to ask and learn and know about. And so it's going to be fun because I'm going to be learning while my audience will also be learning at the same time. So yeah, I think it's just going to be amazing having you.
Good. I hope I add some value to the work that you're doing, and I hope I add some value to your audiences, and I'm sure that I will also learn a few things along the way. So it will be mutual.
So I want to start off with, the legacy part. Like, I want to start off with your journey exactly. Like, you started so young and yet managed to establish a strong name in the market in such a short period of time. So, like, what do you think exactly happened? Was it your mindset? Was it your work ethic? Like, just help us decode that part.
So first of all, I don't know to what extent I have a very strong sort of name in the market, but taking your word for it for a second, I would say the few things that the few um, practices I put in place are just things that you would learn in school and in college. Just pretty straightforward. Work very very hard. Study everything that you receive. Get into the details. Don't leave things at high levels because you expect others to do them for you. You need to get down into the dirty details and understand for yourself, especially when you're starting off, because therein lies, as they say, the devil is in the details. So you get into the depth of your subject matter, and once you're in there and you start developing a certain level of expertise, I think the business then starts coming naturally to you, and or at least it did to me. And just I tried to get acquainted with the length and breadth of work. So, right from the approvals process to, land records to sales to marketing to design and eventually construction as well. Of course, law was part of it, and, regulatory stuff as well. So, I think when you are in management or when you're trying to essentially put up a company or run a company, or you're put into a position of leadership, it's important for you to have domain expertise. And the only way to develop that in a short period of time is to put in the hard yards and to do all the hard work to get there. So that's really what I followed. I figured that there's no substitute to hard work, and that's what I did. Just picked up, read whatever I could, learned whatever I could, attended as many meetings as I could, asked questions, was felt like an idiot a lot of times as well, but that's okay. Um, but in the process, picked up the kind of domain expertise that I think has given me a lot of knowledge with respect to my sector, and I hope a decent quality name in the market.
I think the interesting part which you really spoke about was like asking questions because I think where it comes from is the reason why people are scared to ask questions. I think I kind of figured that part out because even I was earlier very scared of asking questions. So what happens when you're in school is basically when you try to ask questions, you're afraid that other students may laugh or they may think that you're stupid. And that's when the fear gets embedded within you. And I
Yeah.
had the same problem. I used to be like very afraid to ask questions. And then slowly I decided that maybe 5 years later, I won't be even knowing half of these people. They won't be in my class. We'll be in different colleges. We'll be in different schools. And it would just be stupid if I don't ask right now and then try to figure out what it is or what I missed out on. And that's when even I started asking questions. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's one advice which I really liked of yours.
No, that's excellent. And I would also go further and say that a lot of times, I mean, I was the same as you, and I remain the same. You do feel a little bit insecure when you want to ask questions that you think people have the answer for, right, or have the answer to. But if you don't ask the question, you're not going to know where your knowledge was lacking and where the gaps in your expertise was. So I think that's one thing which, for self improvement and to just become a better entrepreneur, a better business person, better podcast host, you need to ask those questions and you need to do them fearlessly. And a lot of times in school and in college, I would find that the question that I would ask, or the question that somebody else would, muster up the courage to ask, was a question I myself was feeling, embarrassed to ask. So a lot of times you have to understand that you do have a certain baseline knowledge, you do have a certain baseline understanding. And if you're struggling with a point that you need to clarify, chances are somebody else is too. So you're doing yourself a favor and you're also doing somebody else a favor by asking the question. And it's important, therefore, to have the courage to do so. And, if people make you feel like a bit stupid for doing that, it's okay. It doesn't matter, You probably are giving them a good service by asking that anyway. So that's how I would really approach this. And yeah, there will be moments where you feel a little bit dumb, but that's okay. You can't take yourself so seriously all the time as well.
Here's the funny part. Like, this is for the audience. Just before Jay and I started recording the podcast, I told him there were some questions which I don't know if they would fit into the podcast or not, but I told him that I'd be asking them post the podcast. So, like, yeah. Right. So I wanted to go to like the next part, which is like, you come from a family that has a fascinating story and legacy on how your grandfather started the group from scratch and went on to build such a huge group. So like, if you don't mind, could you tell us the story and in what way did it impact you and, becoming the person who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very inspiring story, at least for me and for our entire family. So, my grandfather used to live he had a family business and a family enterprise in Karachi, which is, now in Pakistan. Back then it was in undivided India. And at the time of independence and partition, they lost everything. My grandfather was 7 years old in his factories, watched, a lot of his factory workers killed before his eyes. And he was educated. He was pretty intelligent. But they lost everything as a family, and he had to, flee pretty much overnight in a train and moved from Karachi to Calcutta, where he had some family members. And he essentially started off his life from scratch from there. Now, being very entrepreneurial from that age, he essentially put himself through school. And, when he was old enough to actually start doing some form of business, he did come from a business family. So that was something that he was very keen on doing right from a young age. He borrowed some money from a relative and opened up a store that sold tea leaves. And this was in the sort of interiors of West Bengal, very, very hot, 40, 45 degrees, no air conditioning at the time. And it was a little shop. And, in order to achieve maximum sales at the time, what my grandfather used to do is he used to sleep in the store. He would not have time to go home. So essentially he would wrap up with work at about 8, 9 o'clock at night, go to bed in the store and wake up early the next morning or just outside the shop and wake up early the next morning and start again. And in his very early days, as the person who ran this tea shop, his entire inventory got robbed. So he lost his entire investment, almost overnight. The locks were broken, and when he woke up one day, and he found that all of his material had been robbed. This was actually a point where he had actually gone home to see his family, and he came back to find that he had no more material remaining and no more stocks remaining in his business. For someone at that age and for someone at that time having essentially all their savings, in fact, probably in debt, having that been stolen, and you lose essentially what form of livelihood you had or your ability to pay off your debts, it can be quite devastating. It was a very difficult time for him at the time, but he was quite tough, very mentally very, very, very strong. And he just picked himself up and he said, look, this has happened and this is the luck of the draw. And he went on to take a job selling records at a local store. So he ended up selling records. He was very well educated by the time. He had actually put himself through school and college, spoke excellent English, actually graduated with the first class from St. Xavier's College in Calcutta at the time. So that was, it was a great mark of distinction as a, distinction in academia to have graduated from there. And he did that on his own steam. He did that whilst actually working part-time as well. So he had that mental toughness, and using his education, using his knowledge, using his spoken English skills, started working in this record shop, wherein he became friendly with one of the patrons, who used to be a very large local business person. They became good friends. That person, grew fond of my grandfather. And essentially at that time, if you found good people as a business person, competent people who saw eye to eye with you, you would want them to be part of your organization. It was the way things worked at the time, from what I understand, to a great extent today as well. So he hired him. He hired him to be his right hand and hired him to run his coal mines, his salt mines, all of those things in West Bengal. So my grandfather did all of that. And thereafter, this family wanted to diversify and get into other businesses. So they sent my grandfather to Bombay. At that time, it was Bombay, to actually explore textiles. And he got into the textile trade. He actually acquired a factory, started running, became in charge of a factory, formed a joint venture with very strong local partners. And in the 1970s, the entire mill industry was nationalized. So what happened is, I don't know, maybe, you would not be familiar with this. It was much before my time as well, significantly before yours. But the entire mill industry was nationalized by the government then in force. And a lot of these factories had to shut down overnight. And my grandfather did what any good business person would do and said that I cannot sustain this operation anymore. Shut it down, and was immediately taken to court by the local joint venture partner of his. So they didn't see eye to eye on that issue, and they decided to litigate. My grandfather, again, being a pretty hardy guy, being pretty stubborn, pretty mentally tough, fought the case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And remember, he was an employee at this time. He was just a person who was running the factories on behalf of his employer, and he was up against one of the largest textile families of the country at the time. And to hear him say it, he would say that I had my two lawyers appearing for me in the Supreme Court, and up against me were all the senior counsels and all the who's who of the legal fraternity. And he fought his way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and he won. The Supreme Court held in his favor, saying that Mr. Goenka acted in the way that any normal business person would, any prudent business person would, and his stand was vindicated. So, this is, from there, he decided to go out on his own. He had a few relationships that he had cultivated, and he decided that the one need that he wanted to service, or the one gap that he wanted to fill, was providing housing to the middle classes in India. In Bombay at the time, it was South Bombay was the only place where, quality real estate was being built. Nobody was really building anything in the suburbs today, which are now essentially super affluent, very notable suburbs. There was swampland when my grandfather actually started his career. And he said that this is what I'll do. I'll build for people who are, not the wealthiest of society, because society is not building those quality homes for them. And he started his career then, with his first project being one that he built for displaced mill workers, incidentally. So a lot of mill workers who had lost their jobs in the nationalization were rehoused in the very first project that he built. And he started building his business from there. So that's just a little 5 minute story about, what made my grandfather this extremely hardy man, and stubborn, very fair though, and an absolute visionary for his time. And whenever I think about him, I can feel nothing but inspired.
It's like a very firing up story. So like I asked you to tell the story for the audience that didn't know. I read about it, and I think that was one thing which completely changed my perspective, which is being persistent and continuously putting in the effort and hard work. Because your grandfather actually proved it, that when you continuously try and put in hard work, no amount of failures can stop you from succeeding. And I think that's one big take which I got from reading that story itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And every time he was knocked down, he just got back up and tried again. And I think there's a lot to learn in that. You will encounter speed bumps along your way. You will encounter things that are obstacles and do slow you down, but that's okay. That's just part of the journey. And you have to have the grit. At least I believe that you have to have the grit and the mental fortitude to believe that once you navigate through that, you're going to be in a better, you would be better off for it. And you have to have that innate sense of optimism that, things are going to turn out in the way that you want them to. And this was something truly special about that generation of entrepreneurs. The kind of hardships that those people saw, right from the partition to, in the Western world, 2 world wars in quick succession. It gives them, of course, they have their downsides. You end up, not being very in touch with your emotions, because you've dealt with such adversity. But it's important. It demonstrates the kind of grit and the kind of fortitude that they have, and the kind of energy and reluctance to take no for an answer they brought into the business world.
But like, how do you think that how do you think anyone can develop that warrior mindset in this age, especially for someone like, okay, so for my generation, we keep on moving things. We want things to happen really very fast. Something's happening. We like, even attention span's gone down. People watch a lot of reels nowadays because they have less attention span. They can't focus. They want to shift changes. They keep on shifting jobs. They want to try this. They want to try that. So how do you think they can like develop that warrior mentality of continuously fighting and doing that?
That's a very good question, and frankly, I wouldn't have the answer, because I think it's something that the world's most intelligent psychologists are thinking about today. And what I will say is that it's important to think about committing to something, and to being very clear about what you want to commit to. If you decide to commit to it, take the full, think about it, spend a lot of time thinking about it, and commit fully. And once you do that, I think you'll find a very natural tendency to wanting to keep going. To want to keep going with respect to the path that you've chosen. You say that in today's sort of world, a lot of people from your generation want very quick results, very quick answers, and want to move around a lot, right? We're fortunate that the world affords us that kind of liberty, right? Our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation didn't have that liberty available to them. So it's a luxury that we have. But I think it's also something which ends up creating relationships and bonds that are somewhat superficial. So it's important to therefore it's important to know what you want to get into, and be clear that this is something that you want. Look at it with a lifetime perspective. rather than something that you want to look at for the next 2 to 5 years. You may end up choosing a different career path in 2 to 5 years because this may just not work for you, and that's okay. But you should not go into something thinking that it's temporary. It's because that's not how the great institutions of the world were built. That's not how Rome was not built in a day, right? This is a saying that we hear all the time. Rome wasn't built in a day; it took generations and thousands of years. And there's a lot to learn from that. You have to keep persisting, you have to keep working, and you have to make those small incremental changes over time, and after having put in effort and energy. And when you have made enough of those, you will find yourself at a point where you look back and you say, oh wow, that's quite a lot of ground that I've covered. Whereas whilst you're actually in the process of doing so, it feels like every change is monumental and every change is very slow. So it's a difficult question to answer, but this is the way I'd sort of offer my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think I need to I'm going to try and practice that and embed that to, focus on the thing. Because even my mind, like I told you, it juggles a lot between different things. And I think this advice was helpful for me. So I think I wanted to use that.
Yeah. No, take a long-term perspective on things, and what that will also enable you to do is to put short-term challenges into perspective. So a lot of times we have a tendency to feel overwhelmed by the problem that's in front of us. And if you have a much longer term vision for yourself and the work that you're doing, those things seem like minor blips on a radar. It's like if you take Elon Musk, for example, the amount of failures that he struggled through before he had successful launches and has built the, SpaceX that he has today with, this mission of going to Mars being something that is pretty much around the corner insofar as he is concerned. Had he allowed himself to change tack every time he had a failed launch or every time something didn't go the way that he believed it should have gone, I don't think we would be where we are. I don't think he would be where he is today. And I think the world is better off for it. The world is better off for the work that he's done. As an example, and there's many more like this. It's just one that's topical at the moment.
Correct. I'm hoping that I can do that. Another question which just popped up in my mind was that what was the best advice that your family gave you?
So my grandfather used to have this very interesting saying. He was somebody who's seen quite a lot and had his own operating model of the world in his mind, and he used to say to us that when he was giving us advice on how we should conduct ourselves and his grandkids, when he was giving us advice on how we should conduct ourselves and conduct our business, he'd say, having an ego leads to expectations. Expectations always lead to anger, and anger always leads to disappointment. So it was a very, very reductive and, logical scheme that he presented. And the idea of telling you this is that if you don't want disappointment, don't be egotistical. Don't have that ego, don't have that expectation, because that is going to lead you to a place where the end goal is only you being disappointed. So it was a very, very prescient saying, and it's something that I try to practice. We all have whatever egos we do have, but it's important to keep it in check. And I learned a great deal from my grandfather, and I try to practice it to the greatest extent I can. And I look around and I see, maybe it's confirmation bias, but I see it at play quite a lot in the world. That the most egotistical man or woman is the one who's most disappointed. And the one who's a little bit less egotistical is probably doing a little bit better.
So I'm not sure if my translation is correct. In a sense, can we also say that it's like the saying, like giving without expecting, we need to give back more than expecting? In a sense, would that also be true to this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's about giving with your energy, giving with your time, giving with your money, giving with your love, your everything, right? You have to be, if you discard this sort of egotistical conception of yourself, you are much more willing to be giving with your time, energy, and resources. And as a result, you jettison the one thing that necessarily leads to disappointment for yourself and for those around you. Because a disappointed and angry person is of no good to anyone, And if you get rid of those forces that take you there, um, you're going to be better off for them. So humility is a virtue that we were taught. My grandfather taught us. Is something that's indispensable, both because it's a good way to be, and because it will serve you well in the world of in your professional and personal lives as well.
Yeah, I had a story which was like not completely related to this. Like it's kind of like a theory, exactly not completely related, but in a sense it is related. Like you said, when you give your time to someone. So basically, what I've learned is when you're trying to like build relationships with someone, if there's someone really new, this is what I've personally noticed, which is when you give them time and when you open up first, you're slowly forming that bond. I've noticed that a bond with another person forms much more faster when you tell them stories or when you tell them these tiny little secrets that you have or your fun likings, because what happens is, I don't know how, I'm a really excellent communicator and I can communicate with almost everyone. So one day I just tried thinking about it, which is I might suddenly start talking about anything. I might ask questions like, oh, this is my favorite food. What is yours? Or this is what I like. So when you open up, when you give someone what you're feeling, when you think about it, like when you give them your time, it helps in forming healthier relationships. That's what I felt.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and it's a very straightforward reason for that as well, because you are essentially putting some part of yourself before that person, which they don't know about, right? And as a result, it's human nature to feel reciprocal. So they will reciprocate back. And through that process, you will develop a much stronger bond. And it's something which, if you're doing already, you're doing a very good job. You've learned something which, it took me 10 years in business to figure out. So I think you're doing very well. And it's something which is, I think, to a good large extent, very, very true.
Yeah, it kind of like helps in building trust. So when you're sharing a secret, what happens is the other person like, okay, this person already trusts me, even though we've met each other, like we've known each other for just a week, but this person already trusts me with the secrets of what he thinks and all that stuff. And that's when they start trusting you more. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
The psychology
Yeah,
behind
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And there's research on this, and when you read books written by ace negotiators, this is one of the practices that they tell you to follow. And of course, it's just interesting reading. But there's a lot of truth to that, and you're essentially opening up to someone, and in doing that, you're breaking down some kind of edifice that they may think you have put up before them, and that allows them to have a way in, and therefore form a much stronger bond.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, I read about it and that's when I came to know about it. I think that's how I kind of figured it out. And I don't know, it was even a bit of it was inborn, I would say. I just haven't figured out completely yet, but yeah.
Great. No, that's amazing. Just keep doing it, and you'll figure out the drivers.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so I wanted to come to the real estate part since Dynamix Group is into the real estate segment. So, like, when it comes to real estate, what are like the ABCs of real estate? For someone like me who doesn't know anything in my audience, like, what are the basics of it? What would you say?
So, if do you want to be a real estate developer, or do you want to be a real estate consumer? Because they're two very different things.
I have no clue about it. I think could you give us a little bit of both the perspective side?
Sure. So if you want to consume real estate, so if you want to just go buy a house, or you want to go buy an office, or you want to go buy a shop, for example, it's fairly straightforward in today's world, with the Real Estate Regulatory Act being something that provides a lot of consumer protection. compared to the old days where that wasn't the case. So all you need to do is essentially look up the project that you want to invest in, understand how it's financed, understand where it is on its approvals. The most important thing with any real estate project is its approval cycle, because in India, it's very, very, very challenging to bring in approvals. And that's what, at least in the real estate sector, takes the longest time to have and is the most complex part of the process. Once those are in, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you just need to figure out whether the developer that you're wanting to buy a flat from is a credible name, right? What is the work that they've done in the past? Have they delivered projects to a high standard or to a promised standard and on time, right? So you need to figure that out. That's two very important questions that you should ask. B, are the projects that they are building, and is the project that you're interested in, is it completely approved from start to finish? Are there any issues that may come up later on in the development cycle of the project that, could hamper the development or could delay the development? And C, is the price that the builder is offering you a fair one? What is the prevailing price in the market? And what is the price that he's asking you to pay? What are the payment terms? Again, all feeds into the overall commercial discussion. And are you, as the buyer, going to be able to meet those commercial terms? Because it's important for you to buy something that you know that you can afford and you can meet your obligations towards. Because if you're not able to, you're putting yourself and the project that you bought in, at risk. Because you not being able to make payments means that you may end up, having some kind of dispute with the person that you've bought from, and you not being able to make payments for the builder may put him in financial trouble as well. So that's really important to figure out. And on top of that, if you can, get a home loan based on your income profile and your age, etc., you should do that, because it's cheap today. Home loans are quite cheap. They're 6.75, 7%, very, very attractive rates, because the overall lending rates in the country are down. So if you do that, you end up you will be pretty well off, and you'll be pretty okay with respect to a real estate investment. So that's if you're a real estate buyer.
Sorry for interrupting you. Really sorry for interrupting. Before we get into the commercial side, I had a question. What happens to the consumer side? Like, what happens if a consumer makes a commitment of a certain amount of payment and then he's not able to meet it? Like, what happens after that?
So there are very strict provisions under RERA, so the Real Estate Regulatory Authority. So if the consumer is unable to make payments and decides that he's unable to go ahead with the transaction for whatever reason, right? Anyone may have a good and proper reason for wanting to opt out of the deal. They are entitled to a refund of their money, less some amount of money that the builder would have spent in actually acquiring the customer. So if, for example, if you would acquire a flat from me, I would probably end up spending money on marketing. I would have lost the opportunity to sell the flat to somebody else. I would have paid some brokerage to a broker if a broker was involved. So I have spent money in actually acquiring you as a customer. So I'm entitled to that money back, and the rest of the money that you paid me gets refunded back to you. That's pretty much the way. And there are other contractual provisions that you have to look for, but those are more, detailed sort of legalese, which I don't think it's worth getting into at this point. But that's broadly what it is. If you're not able to meet your commitments, you're entitled to receive your money back. And that's if you want to opt out. If you want to opt in and you need more time to make your payments, right? You say to the builder, look, I was due to pay you this money today, but I need a 1 year to pay it to you. The builder may decide whether that works for him or not, right? Because he's factored his receivables over a period of time and over certain milestones that you committed to. But you need a deviation on that. You need some relaxation on that. So the builder will say fine, and the provisions of RERA provide for some amount of additional interest to be paid by you as compensation, or as to compensate for the time value lost of that money. So that's broadly what happens in case of, someone not being able to meet their financial commitments as a buyer to a developer.
Okay. Yeah, you can go to the commercial side.
Yeah. Yeah. And now if you're a real estate developer, okay, quite a lot more complicated, I imagine. Because you have to essentially conduct this, heavy moving piece orchestra all the time. So you're essentially right from acquiring land, you need to figure out whether the land that you're being offered has any issues with respect to regulatory questions. The laws in our country change all the time. So you have to be completely up to date with those and make sure that, tomorrow something that happens on the legal front doesn't actually make your land undevelopable, or something that's that you expect to happen doesn't make your land undevelopable. So that's one thing that you need to figure out. Then you need to figure out how to finance your land acquisition. There has to be a certain equity, debt, investment mix. So all those questions have to come up as well. Once your land is purchased, what do you actually make there? What does the location lend itself towards? Should you make an office building? Should you make a mall? Should you make an apartment building? If so, what would be the pricing that you would achieve? What will the surrounding market absorb? These are the questions that you need to answer. This is the research that you need to do. And there's quite a lot of work to be done in actually arriving at those answers, because a miscalculation, could render significant losses, or some kind of a improper working on your financial models, your Excel sheets, whatever it is, could result in you making a big financial mistake. So that has to be figured out. Once you figure out what you want to build, you have to design it. So you have to go to architects, engineers, wind tunnel experts, etc., and get your project entirely designed. Now there's a sort of very fundamental language that needs to be followed when you do that, because you have to be able to make your building meet the brief that your customer wants. So you have to build what the customer desires, whilst also ensuring that it meets your financial expectations in terms of cost. You can design something that, is like a Rolls Royce, but you can't build it at the price of a Tata Nano, right? So it has to be worked out in that manner. So if I'm building something in a location which is a low income location, for example, right? Or if I'm building a low income house, right, for somebody, I cannot design it in the same way that I would potentially design a ultra luxury development. And that's where a lot of builders get things wrong as well. It's not a one size fits all. It's a different science essentially that you employ for different types of asset classes. Offices are designed in a completely different way to housing, and housing at one end of the spectrum is completely different to housing at the other end of the spectrum. And that's just the way the market works. And that's what the customers want. So you got to figure out what you want to design. Once it's designed and ready, you have to cost it, and you have to go and get it approved. And then the approval process itself requires a lot of research, a lot of work, and a lot of effort. So you have to read all the regulations. You got to understand what's going on in the overall regulatory environment, how it works, how the file will move from one table to the next, all the way up to the final signing authority, and how you can minimize the time, because every day that's lost in you not actually constructing or selling on site is money lost in terms of interest. There's time lost in terms of a day that you're never getting back. So minimizing that process, and like I said earlier, the only way you'll be on top of that process and be able to minimize it is if you know it deeply, if you've studied it, if you've actually spent the time that you ought to have to understand what needs to be done. And once you get your building approvals in, how to reach your customer. Today, the world is so different. When I joined the business in, 10 years ago, we used to still rely on newspaper ads and hoardings, right? And, that kind of communication, talk through brokers, talk through newspapers, magazines, etc. Now nobody does that anymore. We all do it. It's all marketed through digital media, SMS and WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram, Google AdWords. And it's a whole changing environment. The way that the customer is approached, the way the customer is spoken to, the whole language is different today. So how do you distribute your product essentially? How do you actually reach customers is a question that you have to ask yourself. And then you have to employ the right people to be able to do that for you. And as you sell, your product gains essentially proof of concept, and that it's a viable product, and it, prior to going out into the market for sale, is registered with the real estate regulatory authority, and you tender the job to, you invite good quality contractors and builders to build it for you, and you start construction. And you have to have a very solid control over timeline, very solid control over costs. For example, commodity prices are going up significantly today. Steel and cement prices are much higher today than they were, a year and a half ago. And those affect your bottom line. So there's constant monitoring on that as well. So there's a lot of stuff to consider, but this is broadly the way the entire process runs. And there's work, and there's knowledge, and there's expertise from disparate different stakeholders at every step of the way.
I just had a question which has been in my mind for a while. I don't know, it may sound foolish, which is basically what happens is, I think there's a rule that every time, whenever the construction company delays in by a few days, a few number of days, or a few number of months, they pay the customers a certain amount of money, correct? Is there
right.
Some rule?
Yeah, so the real estate regulatory authority has the rule which says that if the project is delayed beyond a certain number, beyond the date that so for example, I start a project and I say I'm going to build it and hand it over, in 4 years from today. Once that 4-year period is over, right? For every day of delay that I suffer, or that the customer suffers, there's interest that has to be paid to the customer for that delay.
So I had the question, which was, what happened during the time of COVID?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. COVID was out of everybody's control, right? Construction sites were shut down for the longest time. Labor was very difficult. Migrant labor had all gone back to their homes. So it was a difficult time for everybody to navigate. What the government did, what the RERA authorities did at the time, was they said that, look, this is something which is called force majeure, right? It's just out of everyone's hands. And therefore it's neither the builder's fault nor is it the customer's fault, right? So what RERA did is it essentially gave everybody a 6-month extension of the timelines. So for example, if a building was to be built by the 31st September 2021, 30th September, 2021, it got an automatic extension to 31st of March 2022. So it gave everybody a 6-month grace essentially, because things were very difficult across the sector and across the country for that period of the first wave.
Another question that I had was, how do you think, like, at construction sites, how do engineers manage labor? So what I feel is laborers get paid on a everyday basis. So like every day they work, they get paid a certain amount. So what if there are these people, the laborers start working slowly, intentionally, so that they can work for more days and earn more cash? So how do engineers manage that to keep them working at a certain speed and keep them efficient?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question and a very good question. But the short answer to that is there's 2 ways, right? One is sometimes the labor is incentivized. So, if they meet X quantum of production in a certain day, or, they cast so much concrete or they tie so much steel, they get, a bonus for that day. So that incentivizes them to work quickly. Number one. Number two, every contractor good contractors have the knowledge and expertise to know what kind of production they can expect out of their laborers for a particular day. A steel fixer will tie X, 100 kilos or X, tons of steel in a particular given period of time. And the contractors know this. That's how they actually work out their calculations. And they come back to you on what would be the requirements. So there is a certain amount of knowledge that people come with. There's a certain amount of incentivization. And more than anything, Ayush, you just have to, at some point, trust the fact that people are going to just put their best foot forward and build systems that ensure that, people are incentivized to do that. And you will have a few bad apples, but that does not ruin the entire apple cart.
Okay, that's really interesting. Like that was a question which had been in my mind for like so many years, and I never really figured out the answer to that. And finally, I got the answer for that.
Sure.
So, like, I wanted to ask you: is real estate like considered a good investment option? Because, like, in our country, we keep on hearing that we should invest in real estate, but is it a safe option? Like, how is it? Like, what is the option?
Look, there's two aspects to home ownership, right? One is the important emotional aspect, right? Take a scenario like COVID-19. We're all confined to our homes. You really realize that the home is far more important than what you ever thought it was. I myself used to view my home as a place to, have a shower and go to sleep, and I was out the rest of the day. It's much more than that now. And you understand that after having gone through this kind of a tumultuous period. So having a roof over your head, which you own, right, provides a lot of emotional stability to families and to people. If you consider a scenario like COVID, what happened, right? We were all confined to our homes. We couldn't go out. We had to work from home. So you needed a good quality space to live and work in, right? Now, if you rented a home, right, you constantly had to make sure you paid the rent on time, failing which you faced the possibility of eviction, right? You could be evicted, you could be out on the streets, and where do you go, right? What do? You either go back to your parents' house, or if your parents don't live in the city that you're actually renting in, what do? Do you go back? Do you work remotely from a place that's not yours? Do you uproot your entire social setting? Very difficult, right? So for renters, in a time like COVID-19, there was job insecurity. We heard about a lot of people who lost their jobs. Companies closed down. Some companies downsized. Salaries were cut for a lot of people. So now someone who's earning X number of rupees, and out of that X number of rupees spend, say, 30% on or 40% on their rent, right? If that X becomes half, right, because he's had to take a salary cut, or he or she has been made redundant, or whatever it is, how do you pay the rent bill, right? And then you're constantly under fear of eviction. You either dip into your savings. If you don't want to do that, you have fear of eviction, or if you don't have those savings, you're out on the road. So contrast that with a homeowner, right? They're at home. They don't have this mental pressure. It's bad enough out there as it is. You're struggling with a salary cut. You're seeing a lot of loved ones go through, COVID. You're seeing this bad news on the television every day. At least you have the comfort and security of your home. And if you had a home loan, right, the Reserve Bank of India has given us a 6-month break, a 6-month moratorium was the word, on interest payments. So it's not like the banker's calling you and breathing down your neck saying, make the payment or you're going to be out, the way your landlord would. Because, we must sympathize with the landlord as well. He also has bills to pay. He also has ends to meet. And so, who's at fault? No one's at fault in the renter scenario. But if you own the place, you have the emotional stability, plus you have government incentives and government stability provided to you as well through these, interest moratoriums and repayment moratoriums. So the homeowner was far more secure. Now, also, you have a homeowner that has paid off his or her mortgage. and is sitting with the asset with no debt on it, right? He can approach a bank and say, listen, please, I'd like to mortgage my home, my asset, and I'd like, some money to use to tide me through this time, to support my business if I'm a small business owner, for example. So the home becomes an asset that can be used to leverage to actually support other aspects of life as well, which a rental can never be. So home ownership from an emotional perspective is extremely important. Also financially, home is never an asset that you ever want to sell. It's an asset that you want to hold on to, or it's the asset that you want to pass down through generations to generation. And when you're looking at that kind of a time horizon in cities like Mumbai, for example, there's no land that's being increased in the city. It's a land-starved city, right? And as a country, we're what, 25 to 30% urbanized? Cities are growing larger and larger, demand is going only higher. And as a result, real estate for a long-term investment is a good idea. It gives you the emotional stability that you want. It also gives you financial stability. It's a hard asset that you can hold on to and you can use, unlike, for example, a share of stock in a company, which is a great financial asset, right? And you can buy and sell it almost overnight. With a home, it takes longer to buy, it takes equally long to sell. But there's utility in it, and it's a large asset which can be a great source of stability and a great source of income on a rainy day. Specifically, and sorry to add to that, in a country like India, buying high quality real estate in good developments in the metros, I think is always a good idea. Don't overpay for something. If you can, negotiate hard, but you will stand to, at least, if nothing else, preserve your wealth. You will not see the value of the home go from, 100 down to 0 or 100 down to 50 in a very unlikely scenario. It's very unlikely that could happen. Like what happened with the stock market when COVID-19 hit. We went from 14,000 points way down to 8.5 or 9,000 points. So those kinds of swings in values are not seen. Similarly, those kinds of upswings in values are not seen either. The market went from 9,500 to almost 17,000 points now. You won't see that with home ownership, but it's stable. And that's why I think there's a lot of value in owning.
So it's like a safe asset class for holding for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another thing which was this was a very, very personal question, which is Dynamix Group is not just into real estate, but you're also in the hospitality sector. And I think I even Googled this question. It's almost impossible to find a proper answer for this, which is, I've always been curious, how much in profit do luxury hotels and resorts make? So I know if you can't give us the exact number, could you share the profit returns per annum in terms of the percentage in comparison to the investment amount or something like that? How much do you all make, or how do you all make it? I know how do you make it, but how much would it be?
Very tricky question, for the simple reason that every hotel is different, right? You have resort hotels, for example, take a hotel in the Maldives, right? Very large properties, large rooms, big infrastructure to maintain them, but also very high room rates, right? So their cost matrix is very different to, for example, a city hotel, which are, much more consolidated, sitting in one building, 100, 150 rooms, smaller room sizes, much leaner staff, but then also much smaller room revenues. So it's it depends from asset class to asset class as to how, the profitability will work. Where resorts are different, city hotels are different, town hotels are different, and luxury 5 stars are different, 3 stars are different. So within hotels, you've got a length and breadth of everything is they're all unique across their length and breadth. But as a rule of thumb, the operating profit, this does not include the cost of the asset, the cost of the building, right, that you made, and the cost of the rooms and the cost of the hotel, can be anywhere between 25%. So, for example, revenue minus cost of, salaries and insurance and taxes and food in the restaurant, etc. So, operating costs. The operating margin should be sitting in a hotel to anywhere between 25 to 60%. It's a huge range, but a smaller lower end hotel will probably be sitting at a 25% range, and a larger hotel, resort hotel with 5 stars, etc., will probably be sitting at the high end of the range. Now, from that, you have to end up then servicing all of your interest costs, and you have to recover from the 25 to 60% margin. You have to pay the cost of interest on any loans that you have on the hotel, and you also will have to pay off the cost of the asset itself. So the investment that you made in the land, in the building, because those are capital assets. Those are not part of the operating matrix. So that's how typically it would work. And like I said, every hotel is different, but you could look at your investment being returned to you anywhere between 7 to 12 years. So from the day you start operation. So it just depends on what kind of hotel it is. But that's broadly the time horizon that people look at as well.
Okay, wow. That's like a large time for like getting it back. But yeah. But do you
don't have to receive it all back on day one. I mean, for hotel owners hotel owners typically are in it for the very long haul. These are assets that people look at on a 20, 25, 30-year horizon. So if the asset is paying itself off within 7 to 12 years, then you've got another 15, 18, 20 years to earn money with no cost associated with it, essentially no capital cost aside from renovations, refurbishments, etc., etc. So that's typically how the maths broadly works out.
Yeah. So I had the question, which was like in the hospitality sector. So let's say someone Dynamix owns Grand Hyatt Goa. So like do you all like who manages the hotel? So is it your staff, or is it like staff that is trained by Hyatt and you all pay them if they are on your payroll, or like how does that management part work?
So all the staff is on the payroll of the company, but the hotel is managed by the Grand Hyatt Goa. By the Hyatt franchise. The Grand Hyatt Goa is the asset. The Hyatt deploys a GM, a general manager. They take a fee for management, and they train and run all of the operations of the hotel. We are not involved in operations of the hotel, and neither should we, because there's so many better qualified people to do it, such as Hyatt, right? They've got a global booking system. They've got people who are working, thousands of employees working under the Hyatt brand with training and knowledge. And that's the expertise they bring to us, and they take a fee for doing that. They bring us, loyal Hyatt customers. So customers are going to be loyal to the Grand Hyatt Goa because A, it's a good hotel, but B, he's also loyal to the Hyatt brand because the Hyatt brand has standards and quality assurance. So that's typically how it works. They take a fee and they deploy a general manager, but all the staff of the hotel is paid. It remains at the cost of the hotel.
Okay, that was interesting. A last question. I know I took up a lot of time, but the question which I had was, do you think there's a threat faced by the hotels and resorts industry by companies like Airbnb? Definitely. I mean, the sharing economy is a threat to this business. But I think there is something which a luxury hotel provides a customer, which a Airbnb can never reproduce. The sense of service, the sense of occasion, the standards that these hotels have honed for years will never be replicated in an apartment rental over a few days. So I think that particular segment of the market continues to have a future.
even in the face of an Airbnb, yes, it will impact some of its, it will be a threat that it has to pay heed to. But I do not think that, hotels are going out of business anytime soon in the face of Airbnb, because it's fundamentally a fairly different value proposition. I will, maybe travel to London and stay at an Airbnb because it's cheaper, it's easier, it's central. I get an apartment to myself, but I have to, manage the food on my own. I've got to stock up the fridge. I've got to, clean the room. I've got to do all of that kind of stuff. And if I'm interested in going to, Goa or the Maldives for a holiday, right? And that's the mood I'm in. I don't really want to be doing all of those things, and therefore the only thing that will provide that to me is a high quality hotel. So I think in the future, it's a challenging time for hotels, with COVID, and the airline industry, the travel industry, the leisure industry. It's all struggling at the moment. But I think it does have a pretty solid future ahead. And yes, threats remain on the horizon, but I think they are of a different nature.
Yeah, I think, and also another reason why people go to like good 5 stars and hotels and resorts is for the experience. Like when you're on a holiday, like you said, no one wants to go and work on a holiday. They just want to have fun. And that is why they're willing to pay that extra amount and the premium to it, because for the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Jay, what is your last advice for anyone who's watching or listening to this podcast?
Just, we live in uncertain times at the moment. So the one thing that you ought to be is very optimistic. We live in a world that's much better today than 5, 7, 10 years ago, and it's hard. It's difficult. We sometimes lose sight of that fact. When you turn on the news and you see, COVID cases spiking or Afghanistan going through tumultuous times, the way it is, you end up really questioning that. But I think we live in a very optimistic time, and we should not lose sight of that. We should not allow ourselves to be consumed by this barrage of content that we're all exposed to. And it's important to filter what is relevant and what isn't, and be a little bit discerning in what we consume insofar as content is concerned. And as a result, just be a little optimistic. Hope for a better future, and work really, really, really hard to get there. There is no substitute for hard work. You will encounter obstacles along the way, and that's just part of the journey. That's just how it is. They will seem like sometimes they throw you off, but you shouldn't let them have that power over you. And just, work your backside off, and you may not get the results you desire, but you'll feel damn good about that. You will feel damn good about the results you do get.
Thank you so much for being here, Park, Jay. We had like an amazing time. I learned so much from you. So yeah, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you. Thanks, Ayush. Thank you for your time, and really, really appreciate all your hard work. Thank you.